What if the very person threatening to destroy someone's kindness had been saved by that same kindness years before, and simply never knew it? This is the story of Mrs. Walker, a restaurant owner who quietly ran two menus her entire career, one for those who could afford to pay, and one for those who could not. It is a story about judgment, humility, and the moment a woman of privilege came face to face with her own reflection and did not recognize it. This is a story about what grace really looks like when it has nothing to prove. It started with a waiter pulling his boss aside with an expression that mixed concern with mild irritation. He nodded toward the counter where a woman was standing quietly with two small children pressed close to either side of her. She was thin, her clothes worn, and she was speaking in a low, careful voice, the voice of someone who is deeply uncomfortable asking for anything at all. The waiter leaned in and said, "There's a woman at the counter looking for trouble." Mrs. Walker walked over and listened. The woman explained that she had $2. That she and her children had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. That she was not asking for charity, just a plate of food, whatever $2 could get them, and she would be grateful for anything at all. Mrs. Walker looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once and said simply, "Of course." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen to arrange the meal. At the counter beside her, a well-dressed woman in an expensive coat had been listening. She caught Mrs. Walker's attention before she could walk away. "Excuse me, how much is a plate of food here?" Mrs. Walker answered without hesitation. $20, ma'am." The rich woman's eyebrows rose sharply. 20. I could have sworn I just heard you tell that woman $2. Mrs. Walker kept her expression perfectly calm. "It is $20. The rich woman studied her for a brief second, then shrugged and ordered 2 plates with salad and walked back to the table where her husband sat waiting. A few minutes passed. The poor woman returned from the restroom and stopped when she reached her children. They had finished every bite on their plates, but the way their eyes moved around the table told her immediately that it had not been enough. She reached into her sweater pocket with her fingers and found what she already knew was there, one last dollar bill. She stood with it in her palm for a moment, weighing what to do. Then she walked back to the counter. What she did not notice was the rich woman rising from her table nearby, phone pressed to her ear, moving in a slow, careful arc that kept the poor woman directly in her line of sight. The poor woman spoke to Mrs. Walker quietly and with visible difficulty. She explained that she had been starving for 2 days. She explained that this was her very last dollar. She said she would wash dishes, clean tables, do anything that was needed, she just needed one more plate for her children. Mrs. Walker looked at her with a gentle and unhurried smile. "You do not have to wash a single thing," she said. Before she could say another word, the rich woman stepped forward from behind, no longer pretending to be on a call. Her voice was sharp and loud enough for the room to hear. "I knew something was wrong. You charged her $2 for the same food you charged me 20. That is fraud." Mrs. Walker tried to explain quietly and without drama. The woman was struggling. She had 2 hungry children. It was a choice made with compassion, not calculation. But the rich woman was not interested in the explanation. Her voice rose further. "So you steal from hardworking people like me to feed lazy people who cannot take care of themselves. That is completely unacceptable." Mrs. Walker did not raise her voice. She did not apologize. She stood straight and said evenly, "I am not stealing from anyone. This is my restaurant. I decide who I help and how I help them." The rich woman pulled out her phone. "My husband happens to know the police chief personally. By tomorrow morning this place will be shut down for corruption." She turned and called across the room to her husband to come over. He stood up from the table and walked toward the counter. When he saw Mrs. Walker standing there, he stopped completely. Something moved across his face, recognition, warmth, and something close to disbelief all at once. He stepped forward and hugged her. "Mrs. Walker," he said. "It has been such a long time." His wife stood very still. "You know her?" He turned to look at his wife and then back at the woman at the counter. 6 years ago I was briefly homeless, he said. I used to come in here and eat. She charged me $1 for a full plate of food when the actual price was $15. She never once made me feel small about it. She is one of the most genuinely good people I have ever met in my life. The room was completely quiet. The rich woman stood with her phone still in her hand and looked at her husband's face for a long moment. Then she looked at Mrs. Walker. Then she looked at the poor woman standing nearby with her 2 children, who had watched the entire scene unfold without understanding most of it. Something shifted visibly in the rich woman's expression, not a performance of guilt, but the real and slightly painful look of a person who has just seen themselves clearly and does not entirely like what they see. She opened her handbag slowly and took out her checkbook. She wrote without speaking and tore the check free and placed it on the counter in front of Mrs. Walker. $8,000. I am sorry, she said quietly. I did not understand what you were doing here. I did not take the time to understand before I opened my mouth. Please keep this and make sure they have enough to eat. Mrs. Walker looked at the check and her eyes filled with tears, not from the money, but from the journey it had taken to get to this moment. Then she turned to the poor woman who was still standing nearby watching all of this in stunned silence. I heard you say you are struggling for work, Mrs. Walker said gently. I own a clothing store just down the street. Come in on Monday and the job is yours. The woman covered her mouth with both hands. Her children leaned into her sides and she held them there, unable to speak. There is a version of this story where the rich woman makes the call, the police arrive, and a good woman loses everything she built because someone with power and no patience decided that fairness meant everyone paying the same price regardless of what they had in their pocket. That version of the story exists in real life every single day. But this version ends differently, because one man remembered $1, a warm plate of food, and a woman who never made him feel like less of a person for needing it. Kindness has a long memory. It travels forward in time in ways we cannot always predict or trace. Mrs. Walker fed a homeless man for $1 6 years ago and never gave it another thought. And 6 years later, that same quiet act walked back through her front door wearing a tailored suit and stood between her and the thing that was about to destroy her. You never know who is watching. You never know who is remembering. And you never know when the seed you planted without thinking will grow into exactly the shelter you need. Drop a heart in the comments if this story moved you. Share it with someone who still believes in the quiet power of doing good. And subscribe because every single week we bring you a story worth feeling. We will see you in the next one.